Hi, this is a high-level demo of the ERC After School Manager software. In this video, we'll go over all the main components of the After School software while leaving out some of the mundane details to keep this demo brief. So the first thing I'm going to do before I log in is I'm going to fill out an enrollment form. This is an optional module, and it's an electronic enrollment form that parents can fill out to enroll their students in your program. There are variations of this form for school year, summer, winter, and spring. So the first thing you may notice is that depending on the parent's language, they can have this form translated into English, Spanish, Hmong, and Punjabi. In addition, if the parent would rather fill out a paper form, that option is also available. I'll fill this out quickly for time, but essentially, you pick your school, you add your student information, maybe an early release schedule, some parent info, .504 plans, complete with an upload. Individuals who are allowed to pick up the student, medical information and medications, allergy information, some disclaimers that are mandatory, a few legal and liability releases, a name, a phone number, a signature, and whether or not the parent filling this out wants a copy. You submit that form, and that information is transferred into the system. Sites can then process the applications in the order that they were received. So now I'm going to go ahead and log in. And the first thing you'll notice is that you're greeted with the wonderful dashboard. We're going to ignore this for a second, and I just want to highlight that the system's documentation is built into these training videos, and everything that we would cover in a training can be rewatched at the user's own pace. So as mentioned before, you have a few dashboards where you can see ADA breakdowns, days of operations, enrollments, and various other breakdowns. There are other dashboards available, and these give you an at-a-glance view of your sites and their progress. The reporting system will allow you to view, export, and print different views of your data. As an example, I will run one of these reports, but they're all going to follow the same basic structure. You pick one or more sites, some options, run the report, get your data, and export it. Now that we've gone through some of the administrative basics, let's just visit a site homepage. So here I am at training session number 1. You can imagine this is a real school name, Lincoln Elementary, for example. And this school has multiple funding sources. So you'll notice that they have a before-school base grant, an after-school supplemental grant, and they are multi-funded in after-school base between ACES and 21st Century. Now, without getting into the details, the system will automatically calculate between any two funding sources or multiple funding sources based on the rules set forth by the funder. In this case, the Department of Education has provided guidance on how to split attendance when you are double funded between ACES and 21st Century. And the system will sort of do that automatically, splitting between those two grants, splitting between base and supplemental, and splitting between after school and before school. This would all be covered in a live training. And so at any point you could see how much ADA is expected, what the site's earned, days of operations expected, and a host of other data. And the last thing to mention is that most data views can be viewed using a fiscal year or a calendar year. As you go through and enter students in attendance, there will be times where erroneous information is entered. The system will automatically flag that information and display it to the user to be fixed here in the Exception Center. It will also provide a link to the appropriate place in the system where those can be fixed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's go back to the home page, and let me pull in a graphic. So, in order to have attendance, you need enrollments. Enrollments are a combination of students and rosters. So let's work in this direction. We will add some students, add some rosters, enroll those students into those rosters, and then take some attendance. As we mentioned at the beginning, enrollment forms are a great way to enter your student information that comes directly from the parents. But here in the student master list, you can also add students by hand. You can add an early release late arrival schedule, authorized pickups, parents, medical and emergency information, and various other pieces of information. You also have the option of importing from feeder schools or importing from a file. So this would be your Aries export that you want to import into the system. We can integrate that with your student information system. Once you have students, you'll need some rosters to put those students into. So here in the Manage Rosters page, I can do a few things. Here's some pre-selected rosters, but I'm just going to go ahead and add a new one. And the only thing I really need to do is give it a name. I'll say My New Roster. Now, depending on your funding source, you may have to do a little more setup. So if you are 21st CCLC funded, you'll know that you have to do an APR. That APR requires us to report on certain categories. And if you were to set up your rosters in a certain way, the information for those mandatory reports could be generated automatically by the system. This would greatly cut down the amount of time that you have to spend aggregating data for mandatory reporting. Now I'm going to skip most of this for now, but I am going to set this new roster to be digital signatures, signatures optional. We'll talk about what that means later, but it's best if I set that up now. So I'll create that roster. It is now here, and I can add students to this roster. And the way I do that is I say Add or Edit Enrollments. To the right is a list of all the students in that master list we discussed earlier. And to the left is the list of students in this roster, of which there are none. So I could just drag and drop individual students. I could do a search. Perhaps I'm trying to enroll all of my first graders into this roster. I drag over, and those students are now enrolled in that roster. And so now it's time to enter some attendance. And here's where things get complicated. Depending on your funding source, you may have more or fewer options on how to take attendance. For example, I'm going to switch sites now and go to one that I specifically set up to do what we call easy attendance, which is going to a screen called Take Attendance, picking your roster. Let's pick one that hasn't been modified today, and just checking in the students who attended the program. And if you were ACES only funded or ELOP only funded, this could work. This won't work with digital signatures, which we'll talk about later, but this is an option. The issue becomes if you are assets funded or have any 21st century funded, due to the new APR guidelines, this will no longer work. We are required to report the number of hours per student engaged in the program, and we cannot derive that from this. So let me go back to my original training session number 1, and we can see the various methods to track student time. So let me pick the roster that I just created, My New Roster. I'll pick a date, today's date. I will refresh that, and I get the roster that I set up. So students need to be checked in and checked out. I'm in check-in mode, and I could do something similar to what I did in the easy attendance, which is check all the students I want present, assign them a time, and check them all in. They're given 3 p.m. Later, I could check them out. Let's say I'm giving all these students a time of 5:55 p.m. I select them, I check them out, and now we are successfully recording the number of minutes they attend the program. And of course, if I needed to make a modification, I could just double click on the row and have that updated. If I wanted my site leads or paraeducators to do attendance at the point of service, I could also use what we call express check-in and check-out. And the idea behind this is that it's very similar to the attendance screen you just saw. In fact, I'll pick a new day for this roster, except that in this case, I'm going to go to tablet view, and this is what it would look like if you were on a mobile device. The idea is that your ground staff could have their roster in their hand and just tap students in, giving them a time of either right now or overriding that. If I make a mistake, I can just unclick that, and I can just check in the students who are there. Later for checkout, they would do something similar. They're still in this roster. Make sure I'm on the correct date. And they could check out the students in a similar fashion. And this is where things get interesting, because as an optional module, you could choose to capture digital signatures. So rather than have your paper sign-out sheets, you could have this module turned on, and whenever I check students out, I can collect a digital signature. And that gets stored in a database, and it sort of lives in this area here. And if you really wanted to, you could still print out a hard copy. There are other tools we won't get into here. Let me get out of tablet mode. Such as the situation where you have bus riders no parent is going to sign them out and you need staff to be able to mass sign them out, you could do that as well. But the last thing I'm going to go over is the idea of a self-serve kiosk. There's some setup you have to do, but essentially the way this works is on a separate device, you log in using a special account. You pick your roster, whether signatures are required, whether you have custody issue restrictions that are going to require a special PIN to be entered before that student can be checked out. And this is placed on a table on a mobile device or old laptop that you have. So a parent comes in, selects their language of choice, searches for their student, and signs them out of the program. Optionally, they can scan a QR code and do this on their own mobile device. This can be used for check-in and check-out, and the idea being that fully digital sites no longer have to do attendance. They'd need to audit attendance, but checking in and checking out and the timestamps happen using a kiosk. And they should give you a good general overview of the features and optional modules of the After School Manager attendance system. One final optional module to mention is the CQI tracker. Now this will be part of a larger FPM system that's under development, but the CQI system is live. This will feed into your mandatory ACES annual spreadsheet that requires CQI information, as well as collecting other information. So let me just click on my school here. Again, this will be part of a larger FPM dashboard, but here is CQI. I can enter some data there. I can enter a new plan based on one of the 12 quality standards, and I can enter information for that plan. This concludes the high-level demo. We hope we've answered enough of your questions for you to want to move to a more in-depth demo. Thank you very much.